Have you ever spent years reaching, striving, chasing, only to realize somewhere along the way that you were never quite sure what you were chasing? Perhaps, like so many of us, you believed it was success, or security, or that one person who would make the world feel right. Maybe it was a sense of purpose, or a place to belong, or just peace. And yet, despite all the effort, the movement, the doing, something remained unsettled, a quiet ache beneath the surface, as if some part of you was whispering, "This isn't it, not quite." If that sounds familiar, then let us sit together for a while. No pressure, no preaching, just a soft space to breathe, reflect, and remember. Today, I'd like to share with you something that took me 2 full decades to understand. 20 years of searching, achieving, failing, wondering. 20 years of trying to become someone, only to slowly, gently discover the most unexpected truth. What I had been chasing was never outside of me. What I longed for was not in the next goal, the next person, or the next stage of life. What I truly needed was something far simpler, and it was within me the entire time. I don't say this lightly, nor do I say it as someone who's figured it all out. No, we're all learning, even now, especially now. But I say it as someone who wishes I had heard it earlier, not as advice, not as instruction, but as a quiet reminder that perhaps, just perhaps, we've been looking in the wrong direction. So if you're in your 60s or 70s, or even beyond, and you find yourself wondering what it was all for, if you're tired of the noise, the pressure, the constant sense that you should be somewhere else by now, then let's take this moment together. Let's slow the pace. Let's return to something true, because the answers we seek do not always come through effort. Sometimes they arrive in stillness. Sometimes they've been waiting all along for us to stop long enough to notice. Shall we begin? Part 1. The illusions we chase in youth. In the rush of our younger years, most of us were taught to run toward titles, toward status, toward some shiny image of a perfect life that we were told would bring us happiness. From an early age, we were handed a map, drawn not by our own hands, but by society's expectations. It told us what success should look like: a respectable career, a beautiful home, a loving partner, perhaps even admiration from others. And so we chased these things breathlessly, sometimes blindly, believing that fulfillment lay just over the next hill. I remember a young man I once met during my travels, a bright-eyed college graduate, full of ambition, charisma, and dreams of climbing the corporate ladder. He had a job offer at a prestigious firm and a wardrobe filled with ironed suits. But the night before his first day, he sat alone in his apartment, staring at the city skyline, and said something I'll never forget. "I've done everything I was told to do, and yet I feel so empty." His voice cracked under the weight of a truth we all feel at some point. The realization that we may have been chasing someone else's idea of meaning, not our own. In Buddhist thought, this is what we call moha, delusion, or confusion. It is the fog that clouds our minds and keeps us chasing mirages. Like a thirsty traveler in the desert, mistaking heat waves for water, we pursue external goals, thinking they'll quench our inner thirst. But the more we accumulate, the more we feel something is still missing. We wonder why, after doing everything right, we still feel a gnawing void just beneath the surface of our smiles. And yet this illusion is not something to blame ourselves for. It's simply the nature of being young, of living in a world that rarely encourages inward reflection. Our culture rewards achievement, not stillness; ambition, not insight. It's no surprise that many of us didn't know any better. How could we? The world whispered louder than our own hearts. But with time and age, something begins to shift. We realize that the ladder we climbed may have been leaning against the wrong wall. We begin to ask gentler questions. What truly matters? What brings peace rather than applause? We discover, often through hardship, that the things we thought would make us whole were never meant to. The Buddha, too, began as a seeker of outer perfection. As Prince Siddhartha, he had every luxury imaginable: jewels, gardens, music, silk robes, and a life free from pain. And yet, beneath all of that comfort, a quiet discontent stirred within him. It wasn't until he left the palace walls, until he stepped away from the illusion, that he began the real journey home. His story reminds us that even those born into abundance are not immune to emptiness, because what we truly yearn for is not comfort, but clarity. So if you find yourself looking back and wondering why some seasons of your life felt hollow despite all you had accomplished, know this: you were never foolish, only human. The illusions of youth are universal, and the unraveling of those illusions is not a loss, but the beginning of true freedom. Part 2. The courage to walk away. There comes a moment in many lives, quiet yet thunderous inside, when we realize that the life we've been living no longer fits who we are becoming. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it begins with a sigh before dawn, or a strange restlessness in the middle of a perfectly ordinary day. A soft voice arises inside, barely a whisper at first, asking, "Is this really what I want? Or have I simply been obeying a script written by someone else?" For me, that voice arrived one morning when I was 19. I had done everything right up until that point: listened to elders, followed the rules, studied hard, smiled on cue. But the truth was, I didn't feel alive. I felt like I was watching someone else live my life. And so I did something that startled everyone around me, including myself. I left college, not because I had a better plan, but because I knew, in the marrow of my bones, that continuing on a path that felt false was a deeper failure than walking into the unknown. Of course, not everyone understood. My family was devastated. Friends were confused. "You have so much potential," they said, as though potential only existed in the shape of a diploma or a corner office. I understood their worry. I carried it too. But there's a quiet strength that comes when you begin to choose yourself, not out of rebellion, but out of reverence for your own truth. In the Buddhist tradition, there's a powerful image: the Bodhisattva standing at a crossroads, holding a lantern in the dark. This figure does not walk the well-lit path because it's safer or more accepted. They walk the untraveled road because they are following the light of inner wisdom. And sometimes that light demands we leave behind the familiar, not out of recklessness, but out of integrity. I once met a retired teacher who, after 35 years in the same classroom, suddenly decided to stop. Her heart, she said, had grown silent in that space. She began painting, walking barefoot in the early morning grass, volunteering at an animal shelter. People around her didn't know what to make of this late life awakening, but her eyes sparkled in a way that no certificate ever gave her. "I'm not running away," she told me. "I'm finally walking toward myself, leaving something behind, be it a job, a relationship, a lifestyle, requires enormous courage. Not the loud cinematic kind, but the quiet, trembling kind. The kind that wakes you at night with questions and walks beside you without answers. The kind that listens to the beating of your own heart more than the voices in the crowd." So if you've ever chosen to walk away from something that no longer nourished your spirit, even when others didn't understand, please know this: you were not lost. You were listening. And that is one of the most sacred acts a human being can perform. To leave behind what no longer feels true is not giving up, it's waking up. Part 3. Make mistakes. Make them young. If there's one thing youth is rich in, besides energy and time, it's the sacred permission to stumble. But sadly, many of us were never taught to honor that truth. We were taught to color inside the lines, to fear failure, to equate mistakes with shame. Somewhere along the way, the messy, beautiful art of trial and error became something to avoid rather than embrace. And yet, the irony is this: the people who live most fully are not the ones who got everything right. They're the ones who weren't afraid to get it wrong. I remember a young woman I met in the Himalayas years ago. She had left her job at a law firm in London, packed a single backpack, and wandered alone across India, not searching for adventure but for healing. "I've made a mess of things," she admitted one evening by a fire. Her voice trembled with regret. "I've hurt people. I've failed myself. I don't even know who I am anymore." And yet, as she spoke, there was something raw and alive in her eyes, a kind of sincerity that only comes from falling and getting back up, again and again. In Buddhist teachings, the path to awakening is not straight and polished. It's winding, often muddy, full of detours. The Buddha himself did not arrive at enlightenment by avoiding life's difficulties. He wandered, he experimented, he got things wrong. He sat with hunger, fear, doubt. He made mistakes in his ascetic practices so extreme they nearly killed him. But each misstep was part of the unfolding, a necessary stone on the path. There's a phrase in Zen: fall down 7 times, get up 8. Not because we're expected to be perfect, but because rising again, with more awareness, more humility, more grace, is how wisdom takes root. Mistakes are not detours from the path, they are the path. When we're young, we often try to construct an identity like a fortress, solid, admired, unbreakable. But it's through the cracks that the light of truth enters. We learn more from the job we walked away from than the one we stayed too long in. We learn more from the relationship that broke us open than the one that kept us safe. And if we are lucky, or rather, if we are willing, we learn that the pain of failure carries hidden teachings that comfort never could. I often wonder how different life would be if we praised our younger selves, not for their achievements, but for their resilience. Not for always choosing right, but for choosing something, daring to move, to leap, to trust, even with trembling hands. So if you're looking back now, remembering a choice that led you somewhere unexpected, or a mistake that cost you more than you thought you could bear, breathe gently into that memory. You did what you could with what you knew at the time. And perhaps, just perhaps, those moments carved out the space in you where compassion now lives. Because a life lived without mistakes is not a life fully lived. And in the end, it's not about never falling, it's about the courage it took to rise again, wiser, softer, more human. Part 4. Let go of other people's opinions. There is a subtle prison that many of us live in for decades, built not with bars and locks, but with expectations, glances, whispered judgments, and the ever-present question, what will people think? And oh, how tightly that question can wrap around our decisions, our identities, even our happiness. For so many years we shape our lives like clay, molding ourselves to please, to avoid criticism, to gain approval from voices that often don't truly see us. But here's the quiet truth, one that may take years or even a lifetime to embrace. Most people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you believe. Their thoughts, just like yours, are mostly occupied with their own worries, their own plans, their own tangled paths. We suffer not from their judgment, but from our imagination of their judgment. And that, my friend, is suffering we can choose to release. I once knew a man in his late 60s who had always wanted to learn to dance. Not ballroom, not something polite, but street-style breakdancing. He had watched it from afar in his youth, but never dared to try. What would people say? A grown man doing head spins. He laughed when he told me. But one day, after retirement, and after the passing of his wife, something shifted in him. He started attending underground dance classes. At first he was clumsy. People stared. Some snickered. But he kept going, week after week. He said something to me I'll never forget. They laughed for 5 minutes, but I've been smiling for 5 years. In Buddhist philosophy, one of the central teachings is on attachment, and among the most subtle forms of attachment is the clinging to our image in others' eyes. We want to be liked. We want to be seen as wise, as kind, as successful, as put together. But that attachment can become a cage. Letting go of that craving is not about becoming indifferent or arrogant. It's about reclaiming your life from the constant tug of invisible strings. The Buddha himself faced criticism. Even after reaching enlightenment, people questioned him, doubted him, insulted him, but he responded not with defensiveness, but with equanimity, a kind of serene spaciousness that comes from knowing that others' views are simply that their views, not your truth. So many of us, especially as we age, carry regrets, not of what we did, but of what we didn't do, because someone else might disapprove. But here's the thing, those people will not carry our regrets for us. They will not lie awake at night, wondering what could have been. They will not live in our skin or in our soul. Only we do. And the older we get, the clearer it becomes. Life is too precious, too brief, too sacred to be lived in the shadow of someone else's opinion. So perhaps it's time to wear the color you love, even if it's too loud. Time to speak the truth you've held inside for years. Time to take that class, write that poem, say that no, or whisper that long-delayed yes, not for applause, not for recognition, but for the sheer joy of finally being free to be you. And once you taste that freedom, even just a drop, you'll wonder why you ever gave it up in the first place. Part 5. Even the successful feel empty. There's a strange silence that sometimes follows success. You've done what they said you should. You built the career, earned the title, bought the house, filled your calendar, perhaps even received admiration. And yet, one evening when the applause fades and the door clicks shut behind you, a question echoes in the quiet: is this it? I have sat across polished dinner tables with people who seem to have everything: doctors, executives, artists, even public figures, each one surrounded by symbols of achievement. And yet, in the softness of private conversation, behind the carefully practiced smiles, their voices would tremble with confession. I feel like something's missing. One woman, a high-powered CEO, once told me, "Every morning I walk into that corner office and feel like I've won a game I don't want to play anymore." Her words were not bitter, only tender. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and yet deep within, she longed not for a higher rung on the ladder, but for stillness, a walk by the lake, a moment with her aging mother, a day without being productive. Buddhism teaches us that the root of suffering is not only pain, but misplaced longing, craving things we think will complete us, only to find they do not. This is dukkha, often translated as suffering, but perhaps better understood as a subtle dissatisfaction that runs through our lives. It's the emptiness that lingers even after we've ticked all the boxes. The Buddha himself was born into wealth, into a life that promised everything. And yet he renounced it all, not out of guilt or disdain, but because he saw its limits. He saw that no amount of pleasure or possession could silence the deeper ache of the heart. And that's the thing about success in the way the world defines it. It can be a beautiful blessing, yes, but it can also become a golden cage. You decorate it, you polish it, but in the end, it still keeps your spirit confined. What many of us are craving isn't more achievement, but more aliveness. Not more recognition, but more connection. Sometimes I think the real milestones in life are not the promotions or the property deeds, but the quiet revolutions that happen within us. Like the moment you realize that peace matters more than prestige, or when you give yourself permission to rest, or when you stop chasing admiration and start choosing authenticity. One retired gentleman once said to me, "The happiest day of my life was the day I gave away my third car and bought a bicycle." He smiled like a child describing his first summer. I felt light, not just physically, but spiritually. For once I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just being me. So if you've ever felt that strange hollowness after a great success, know that you're not broken. You're waking up. Waking up to the truth that wholeness isn't found at the finish line. It's found in the quiet space between heartbeats. It's found in being real, being present, being home within yourself. Part 6. The beauty of living with less. There's a kind of richness that doesn't come from having more, but from needing less. It often takes many years and many burdens to understand this. When we're young, the world teaches us to accumulate possessions, titles, experiences, opinions. We fill our closets, our calendars, even our conversations with more. But somewhere along the way, the weight begins to show, not just on our shelves, but on our souls. I once stayed in a tiny guest house tucked into the hills of northern Vietnam, run by an elderly woman whose life was the very definition of simplicity. She had 2 bowls, 2 spoons, a wooden bed with a thin mattress, and a teapot she polished every morning as if it were a sacred relic. She had no electricity, no Wi-Fi, no interest in news or fashion. And yet, in her presence, there was a peace so deep it felt like you could rest there for days without saying a word. "I used to have more," she told me, pouring jasmine tea into a cracked ceramic cup. "But it only made my mind busier," she smiled. "Now I have less, and I see more." In Buddhist thought, this is the heart of Solitude, contentment. It is not resignation. It is not poverty. It is a noble sufficiency, a quiet knowing that what you have is enough, and what you are is enough. When we live with less, we begin to hear the soft music of life again. We notice the rustle of leaves, the way sunlight rests on the windowsill, the laughter of neighbors, the warmth of a familiar sweater. These details, once drowned by noise, begin to sing. But simplifying isn't just about things, it's also about thoughts, about not needing to win every argument, about letting go of the need to constantly explain yourself, about releasing the compulsion to be everything to everyone. As the Buddha said, let go of what is not yours, a gentle reminder that so much of what we carry was never ours to begin with. I've met many elders who told me that their greatest joy in retirement wasn't in finally traveling the world or finishing a long-held project. It was in clearing out the attic, giving away things, downsizing to a smaller space. I felt like I could breathe again. One woman said, after letting go of 40 years worth of stuff. It wasn't just a house I cleared. It was a part of myself that had been waiting for air. Living with less makes room for more of what matters. Quiet mornings, meaningful conversations, the softness of your own breath. It allows us to trade clutter for clarity, noise for stillness, striving for being. So perhaps the question to ask as we grow older is not, what else can I add to my life? But rather, what can I lovingly release? Because sometimes, letting go is the most generous thing we can do for ourselves and for the world around us. Part 7. Solitude as a sacred mirror. There is a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but full of clarity, full of presence, full of truths that can only be heard when the world grows quiet. And yet for much of our lives we avoid that silence. We fill our days with noise, with people, with distractions, not always because we enjoy them, but because we fear what might surface when we are finally alone. But solitude, when embraced gently, is not loneliness. It is a sacred mirror. It shows us who we truly are when we are no longer performing, explaining, adjusting ourselves to fit into someone else's frame. It allows us to come home, not to a place, but to a presence within. I once met a retired monk who had spent over 20 years in near solitude in the Himalayan foothills. When I asked him whether he ever felt lonely, he smiled, not out of dismissal, but compassion, and said, "Only in the first few years." After that, I realized I had mistaken emptiness for absence, but the silence was not empty. It was filled with everything I had been avoiding. He spoke of how, little by little, the quiet began to reveal things, memories, regrets, joys, truths he had long buried. Solitude, he said, is like the still water that reflects the sky. When the ripples settle, you begin to see what was always there. In Buddhist tradition, solitude is not an escape from life. It is a deep engagement with it. The forest monks of Thailand, the cave yogis of Tibet, even the wandering mendicants of India, they all step away not to reject the world, but to understand it more clearly, starting with the world within. In that stillness, they meet their fears, their stories, their attachments, and slowly they begin to soften, to see, to awaken. For those of us who are not monks or hermits, solitude may look different. It might be the quiet early morning before the household stirs, a walk through the park without a phone, an afternoon spent sitting by a window, simply watching light move across the floor. And in those moments, when no one is asking anything of you, something beautiful begins to happen. You begin to listen, not to the world outside, but to the whisper of your own spirit. I once spoke with a widow in her 70s who told me that the first few months after her husband passed were unbearable. The silence in the house was a piercing reminder of loss, but over time, she began to sit with it, not fight it. She said, "One morning, I stopped crying and started listening, and I heard things in the quiet I never knew were there. I heard gratitude. I heard forgiveness. I heard my own heartbeat." She had discovered what many fear to discover, that solitude, when befriended, can become a sacred teacher. So if you find yourself alone in this season of life, know this: it is not a punishment, nor is it a void. It is an opening, a chance to reconnect with the deepest parts of who you are, to offer yourself the attention you may have always given to others. And in that attention, in that stillness, you may find not just yourself, but the peace that has been waiting for you all along. Part 8. Surrendering the need to control. There is something in us, especially in the earlier decades of life, that wants to hold everything together. We plan, we push, we organize, we forecast, we strive to keep our children safe, our finances stable, our health intact, and our reputation spotless. Somewhere inside, we believe that if we can just control enough, we can keep chaos at bay, that nothing will fall apart, that no one will leave, that pain can be prevented. But life, gentle and unyielding, has a way of humbling even our most careful plans. A diagnosis arrives, a loved one walks away, a job dissolves, A season changes, whether we're ready or not, and we find ourselves standing in the rain, clutching blueprints that no longer apply. It's a hard moment, but it can also be a holy one, because in that space we're given a chance to learn one of the greatest spiritual truths. We are not in control, and that's okay. I once met a couple in their early 70s who had spent decades saving for a dream retirement abroad. They had the plan mapped out in detail: when they would move, what they would build, the life they would create. But just months before their departure, the husband was diagnosed with a rare illness that changed everything. Their plans dissolved like mist. And yet, as the wife told me later with tears and a quiet smile, in the letting go, something softened in us. We stopped clinging to how life was supposed to be and began embracing it as it was. She said their final years together, while not as they imagined, were among the most tender of their marriage. In Buddhism, we speak of anicca, impermanence. It is not a curse, but a reminder that nothing in this world is fixed, and that trying to make it so only creates suffering. The more we resist the natural flow of change, the more we suffer. But when we accept that we are not the masters of this river called life, only humble travelers, we begin to relax. We begin to trust. We begin to breathe again. Letting go of control doesn't mean giving up responsibility or becoming passive. It means doing what you can with care and love, and then releasing your grip on the outcome. It means planting seeds without demanding that the flowers bloom on your timeline. It means trusting that even in uncertainty, something meaningful is unfolding. There's a story in the Zen tradition about a man who holds a rope tightly as he dangles over a cliff. The longer he clings, the more his hands bleed. But when he finally lets go, expecting to fall, he lands softly on a ledge just below. The lesson is not to be reckless, but to understand that control is often just another name for fear, and sometimes surrender brings us to exactly where we were meant to be. So if you're carrying the weight of trying to manage everything, your family, your health, your future, maybe now is the time to loosen your grip, to trust the current, to know that life does not require your control to unfold in beautiful and mysterious ways. Because the deepest peace comes not from holding on, but from finally, mercifully letting go. Part 9. Act from the heart, not for the reward. We live in a world that often ties value to outcome. Do something, and you'll get something. Work hard, and you'll be rewarded. Be kind, and others will return the favor. It's a fair-sounding logic, but it can quietly erode the purity of the heart. Because when we begin to act solely for results, our spirit becomes entangled in expectations. And when those expectations aren't met, when the praise doesn't come, the promotion is delayed, or the affection isn't returned, we feel hollow, resentful, even betrayed. But what if the truest joy wasn't in the reward, but in the doing itself? I once knew a man who every morning for over 20 years swept the small courtyard of the local temple. He wasn't paid. No one asked him. Sometimes, people didn't even notice. When I asked him why he did it, he said, "Because it brings me peace." He spoke of how the sound of the broom calmed his thoughts, how the act of care connected him to something deeper than himself. "It's not about the clean floor," he smiled. "It's about the clear heart." In the teachings of the Buddha, there's a phrase that echoes through centuries: "Do not be attached to the fruits of your labor." It reminds us to act with sincerity, not with strings, to give not to be thanked, but because giving aligns with who we are, to speak kindly, not to impress, but because kindness itself is nourishment. This doesn't mean we abandon goals or ignore outcomes entirely. It means we don't tie our identity to them. We don't hinge our self-worth on the results we can't control. We focus instead on intention, the seed behind every action. Is it pure? Is it kind? Is it honest? If yes, then it is already enough. I once met a woman in her late 60s who had spent much of her life writing poetry, quietly in notebooks she never shared. "They're not very good," she laughed, "and I don't think anyone would publish them. But when I write, I feel like I return to myself." She wasn't chasing literary fame. Her joy was in the process, in the quiet unfolding of words that came straight from her heart. That, to me, is art in its most sacred form. When we act without clinging to results, something shifts. We stop performing, and we begin offering. We begin living from a place of truth, not transaction. Whether we are cooking a meal, planting a tree, writing a letter, or simply listening to a friend, when the action itself becomes the reward, life becomes infinitely richer. And here's the paradox. When we let go of needing the reward, the joy becomes deeper, the satisfaction more whole, because we're no longer waiting for someone to validate what our heart already knows. So if you're weary from giving without return, or doing without applause, let this be your reminder: nothing done with love is ever wasted. Every act from the heart leaves an imprint, not always in the world, but always within you, and that is where the most important rewards live. Part 10. Radical self-acceptance. There's a quiet kind of suffering that many of us carry, not visible on the surface, not spoken aloud at dinner tables, but tucked away in the silence of our private thoughts. It's the sense that we are somehow not enough, that we should have been more successful, more attractive, more disciplined, more something. We compare ourselves to others, to younger versions of ourselves, even to the imagined versions we thought we would become. And in that gap, between who we are and who we think we should be, lies a well of quiet sorrow. But what if the path to peace isn't found in becoming something else, but in coming home to exactly who we are? Years ago, during a retreat I attended in Northern California, a woman in her 70s stood up during a group circle. She was graceful, dignified, and clearly in pain. With tears in her eyes, she shared that she had spent most of her life hating her body. "Even when I was young, and others called me beautiful," she whispered, "I could never see it. I was always at war with myself." There was a long pause. Then she added, "I don't want to spend the last years of my life still thinking I'm not good enough." Her voice cracked something open in the room, because whether we're talking about our appearance, our past choices, our emotional scars, or the paths we never walked, so many of us carry the weight of self-judgment. And yet, as the Buddha taught, the beginning of true healing is metta, loving kindness, not just toward others, but toward ourselves, especially ourselves. Radical self-acceptance doesn't mean we stop growing. It means we stop growing from a place of self-hatred. It means we can look in the mirror and say, "I see you, I honor your story, I forgive what needs forgiving." It means we begin to treat ourselves the way we would treat a dear friend, gently, with compassion, with the understanding that perfection was never the point. In one Zen monastery, there is a practice where monks bow to themselves at the end of each day, not out of ego but out of reverence. They bow to the one who tried, the one who failed, the one who showed up anyway. It's a simple gesture, but profound. Aunt Harry, what would it mean to offer yourself that same bow? I once asked an elderly woman what her greatest wisdom was after 80 years of living. She didn't hesitate. "I wish I had been kinder to myself," she said. "I wasted so much time trying to be different, better, more pleasing. But the people who truly loved me never asked for that. And in the end, neither did life." So if you're still carrying the weight of self-criticism, I invite you gently, softly, to begin setting it down, piece by piece, word by word, mistake by mistake, because there is nothing more sacred, more radical, or more liberating than choosing to accept yourself as you are, right here, in this breath, in this moment. You don't have to earn your worth. You are worthy, not someday. Now. Part 11. You are whole. Right now. For most of our lives, we've been told in subtle and not so subtle ways that we are incomplete, that we need to fix something, achieve something, change something in order to finally be worthy of love, of peace, of rest. We are taught to live as if happiness is a reward waiting for us after we've become better versions of ourselves. But what if that's not true? What if you don't need to be better to be whole? What if you already are? There's a story from the Buddhist tradition about a monk who carried a cracked clay bowl. Every morning he would fill it with water from the river, and every morning a few drops would leak out along the path. Another monk teased him, saying he should get a new bowl. But the older monk simply smiled and said, "This bowl and I, we have traveled many miles together. It may be cracked, but it still holds enough." There was no shame in the imperfection, only quiet dignity. We are all like that bowl. We have our chips, our worn edges, our places where life has left a mark. But we still carry love. We still hold wisdom, we still show up, and that perhaps is more than enough. In the Heart Sutra, one of the most beloved texts in Mahayana Buddhism, there is a phrase that says, "Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form." On the surface it may sound abstract, but what it points to is this: what we perceive as lacking or imperfect is not separate from the sacred. The cracks in us are not barriers to truth. They are the very places where light gets in. I remember sitting with a man who had lost nearly everything: his health, his business, and even some close relationships. And yet in that space of loss, he discovered something surprising. "I realized I was still here," he told me, "still breathing, still watching the sky change colors, still able to feel wonder. I thought I had nothing left, but then I found something I had forgotten: my own presence." You see, wholeness is not something we find at the end of a journey. It is something we remember. It is already here, hidden beneath the layers of self-doubt, waiting to be noticed. It doesn't arrive when we earn it. It emerges when we stop chasing it. And what a liberation that is, to no longer have to strive to become someone else, to finally settle into the beautiful, imperfect truth of your being, to know that this breath, this body, this moment, exactly as it is already sacred. So take a deep breath now. Feel your chest rise and fall. Hear the soft rhythm of your life, humming gently in the background. You are not a project. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a story in motion, a song still being sung, a soul that has never needed to be anything other than what it already is. You are whole, not after the healing, not once the journey is over, not when others finally see you, but now, right now. Part 12. Return to simplicity. As we move deeper into life, there comes a moment, a quiet shift, when we begin to long not for more but for less. Less noise, less rush, less of what pulls us away from the heart of things. And in that longing, something sacred is born, the call to return to simplicity. Simplicity, contrary to what the modern world might suggest, is not plainness. It is not lack. It is clarity. It is depth. It is the choice to no longer chase everything, but to cherish what truly matters. I remember an elderly man I met in a small coastal town. Every morning he sat outside his modest cottage with a worn book in hand and a cup of tea steaming beside him. He didn't have much by worldly standards, no fancy car, no expensive gadgets, but he had time, He had silence. He had stories. "I used to want to be known," he said to me one morning, without taking his eyes off the waves. "Now, I just want to know myself." In Buddhism, simplicity is not just a lifestyle, it is a spiritual principle. It is a return to sati, mindfulness, noticing each moment without needing to possess it. It is walking slowly instead of rushing, eating with gratitude instead of distraction, speaking from presence rather than performance. The Buddha himself lived with a bowl, a robe, and the earth beneath his feet. His life was not impoverished. It was rich in awareness, rich in freedom. So often the most meaningful things arrive without fanfare: the warmth of morning sunlight on your face, the soft murmur of a loved one's voice, the smell of bread baking, the way your breath slows when you finally sit still. These are the treasures that can't be bought or scheduled. They arise in the space that simplicity allows. A woman I once knew shared how, after retiring, she began to let go, first of physical clutter, then of old obligations, and eventually of the stories she no longer needed to tell about who she was. "I thought I would feel small," she said, "but I feel more spacious than I ever have." Her days were no longer packed with to-do lists. Instead, they were filled with gentle rituals: tending her garden, writing letters, lighting a candle before dinner. Life had become, in her words, beautifully ordinary. And perhaps that's where the deepest wisdom lies. Not in adding, but in subtracting. In recognizing that we don't need more to feel full. We need presence. We need essence. We need space for the sacred to rise. So what if, today, we each chose one thing to simplify, not because it makes us more efficient, but because it brings us closer to what's real? What if we traded multitasking for a single mindful breath? What if we stopped trying to impress and instead chose to just be? Because in the end, the simplest lives are often the most luminous, and the quietest moments, those are the ones that echo longest in the soul. Part 13. The Ripening of the Soul. There is a quiet grace that only comes with time, not the time of clocks and calendars, but the time of living, of loving, losing, stumbling, growing. The kind of time that softens sharp edges, that deepens the gaze, that ripens the soul like a late-season fruit. Bruised perhaps, but sweeter for it. In youth, we are often preoccupied with becoming. We chase identities, achievements, validation. We want to be someone, but as the years pass, something unexpected begins to happen. We start to peel back the layers we once worked so hard to build. The masks begin to fall. The performances lose their meaning, and in their place, something simpler, something more honest begins to emerge. I once sat with a man in his 80s who had lived a remarkable life. World traveler, successful entrepreneur, even a published author. But what he spoke about with the most joy had nothing to do with those accomplishments. These days, he said, "My favorite thing is feeding the birds in my garden and watching the sunrise." He paused, then added with a soft chuckle, "I used to think I wanted to leave a legacy. Now I just want to leave each morning gently." That's the beauty of ripening. It's not flashy. It's not about reaching new heights. It's about sinking into deeper ground. It's when we begin to value a quiet afternoon more than applause, a heartfelt conversation more than admiration. It's when the soul no longer wants to be impressive, but authentic. In Buddhist thought, aging is not viewed as a decline, but as a maturation. Just as a tree doesn't bear fruit in its first season, the soul too requires time to fully bloom. The wrinkles on our skin are not failures. They are lines of poetry written by life itself. The slowing of the body is not weakness. It is the universe inviting us to move with intention, with reverence. The ripening of the soul often brings a new kind of wisdom, one that no textbook can teach. It's the wisdom of having survived grief and still believing in joy, of having made mistakes and still trusting in love, of having seen the impermanence of all things and yet choosing to cherish each moment more deeply. I once heard an old monk say, "When the body slows down, the soul speaks louder." And isn't that true? In the stillness of aging, we begin to hear things we missed before, the sacredness in ordinary acts, the tenderness in farewells, the miracle of simply waking up and being able to witness the world one more day. So if you're in a season of life where everything is quieter, where there's less doing, less striving, do not mistake it for emptiness. This may be the very moment your soul has been preparing for all along, the moment when your wisdom ripens into presence, the moment when your heart opens not because it's chasing love, but because it is love. And perhaps in this gentle unfolding, you'll find that you no longer need to prove anything. You no longer need to rush. You can simply sit with yourself as you are and know you have arrived. Conclusion, a soft echo. And so here we are at the quiet end of a long and winding path. Not the end in the sense of a final stop, but more like arriving at a clearing in the forest, where the air feels different, where the light is softer, where you can finally sit down and rest. Not just your body, but your soul. We've wandered together through the illusions of youth, the courage to walk away, the liberation of making mistakes, the heavy shadows of public opinion, and the silent ache of success that didn't satisfy. We've visited the quiet sanctuaries of simplicity and solitude, surrendered control, acted without attachment, and returned home to radical self-acceptance. We've rediscovered that wholeness was never a prize to be won, but a truth to be remembered. And in the ripening of the soul, we have seen that growing older is not a fading, but a deepening. All of this, not as theory, but as a lived, breathing journey, one that continues, even now, even here. If there's one thread that runs through it all, it's this: you were never missing, you were never broken. You didn't need to become someone else to be worthy of love, of rest, of belonging. You only needed to pause long enough to listen, because the peace you were searching for in people, in places, in achievements, it was never out there. It was the quiet place within you, the stillness beneath the striving, the breath beneath the noise. So now, dear friend, if you feel even a small shift in your heart, if some part of you feels just a bit lighter, a bit more spacious, then this moment has already done its work, not by changing you, but by reminding you, you are enough. Before we part, let me leave you with one gentle question to carry. What would change if I no longer believed I had to prove anything to be at peace? And one soft invitation, not as advice but as a blessing. If this message touched a quiet place within you, walk with it, sit with it, let it breathe beside you in the days ahead. You don't need to rush back into the noise. The world can wait, but your soul has waited long enough to be heard. So may you go forward, not seeking more, but savoring what is already here. May you rest in the simple truth of your own presence, and may each breath remind you, you are whole, you are home, you are home, you are already free. Until we meet again, may peace walk with you in every step, in every season, in every silent, sacred hour of your beautiful life.